for coming to attend this first session, which is called Draw Me a Creative City. That's a vast program. And this is the topic we decided to address first during this meeting. So the various speakers will be talking about what a creative city is. We have with us Adamowicz, Mayor of Gdansk, and Jean Rottner with us. I'd like to ask them to come up to the rostrum. Then we'll have Enzo Lavolta, who is probably currently with the Prince, going around the exhibition area. And we'll finish with two well-known heads of industry, who will round off the topic. So the Mayor of Gdansk has the floor. I'd like to thank you for being here. Thank you for reminding us of the fact that Gdansk is one of the biggest cities in Poland. You're on the Baltic Sea. I'm sure that the older people here will remember Arnox. This is a well-known name. You have some leading projects, and the Mayor of Mulhouse is with you as well, and he will be taking the floor to talk about what he's doing in Mulhouse and within the Association of Mayors of France and the Association of Town Planners in France. Pawel Adamowicz, you have the floor. You might like to come over here to give your speech.
Bonjour, good morning. Zdravstvuyte. I'm from Gdansk, from City of Freedom, from Baltic Sea. We are now to the Mediterranean Sea, and I'm from Baltic Sea. Gdansk is the center of Gdansk metropolitan area with over 1.5 million inhabitants. You know that Gdansk is a place where began Second World War in 1939, and of course it's a city where communist system we started to destroy it. I would like to say a few words about our values in the public life with communication with citizens. First values is very important, is openness. I believe that my citizens, inhabitants of Gdańsk, should be have full information about city, about what we do, what we plan. And from since 2008, my calendar with my all details of my activity, all days, has been published daily on the internet. And everybody knows what I do in this moment. This gold standards, now it's standards from all mayors from the biggest cities. Oh, this is one example. Hour and subject, what I do each day. Next, openness is all details, information, or expenses. We prepare city's price list. People, citizens, have to know how much is the cost of new tram, for example. How much for 1,000 meters of the new street. From this year, January, all expenses of the city published daily. Every day we published all information about our expenses online. And of course, non-government organization, people, political parties, opposition, everybody, journalists knows daily online about our expenses. It is example, of course, it's very important to use a good graphic, because now our civilization is a civilization of pictures, graphics, and it's more efficiency to understand, to explain the mechanism of finance, of expenditures in our city. It's another example about the cost of public transport. What is the cost, for example, of new tram or new buses, or how many złotych we must spend for the new line. Another example, me and my deputy mayors, we are very active in the social media channels and blogs like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and many others. And every day, 7 days a week, we explain to our citizens about details of our city. Of course, it's not only me, but I and my staff helps me to manage these channels, social channels. A new program in Gdansk city. We started with open data programs. We collect many informations about city, and we collect, and this is of course this information is very useful not only for the citizens but of course for decision makers too. Another example is technologies. We use, for example, band is application for identifying parts of the city in which new trees should be planted. We offer to the citizens, please help us to plant a new tree. And we collected places, good places for the planted for tree, and people engage very much in this program. Another example of how to use new technology is a problem of waste. How to collect waste, how to organize our collection in our city, and citizens have a chance to use a map of Gdansk city and identified places. Another example is a smart city transportation. City of Gdańsk, City of Sopot, and City of Gdynia, we together, 3 cities, prepare the 3-star smart traffic management. And this application help us for more efficiency managing of transport in our metropolitan area. It's our mission, Smart People, Smart City Hall. We believe that members of City Hall and people from non-government organizations, we together, we have more power for looking for the better solutions for old problems. We organize each other and together for a better city, better quality of live, and we discuss each other or many details. It's a new public culture, new political style, and we believe that smart people, people more active, citizens more active, is means the city will be more smart, more effective. We organize many competitions. We are looking for the new technology. It's an example when we organize with the city of Warsaw and city of Poznań together the cooperation on how to implement good innovative technology in our city. Friendly Smart City Hall. It's a next idea, how to integrate all City Hall's departments, how to integrate staff for better work, more efficiency work, because every time we feel that sometimes people too much individual, too much haven't teamwork style, and this is a goal how to integrate people from City Hall for management with active citizens from a non-government organization. We plan 1st July 2015 new communication channel, civil hub, and we offer to our citizens the new channel for public debate. We think that people will send us proposals, requests, of course sometimes protests. It's normal in pluralistic democratic society, and I hope that it will be more efficiency channel for communication between mayor, between members of city council and people. Thank you very much for your invitation. I would like to invite you to my city, to Gdansk city, situated on Baltic Sea. Thank you very much.
Merci, Monsieur Adamowicz.
Thank you, Mr. Adamowicz. Please join Mr. Rottner at the podium. If I've correctly understood, you are very proud of your citizens. I think that's very important. As already stated this morning, everything indeed hinges on the human dimension, and you have drawn attention to the courage and the feeling of citizenhood of the inhabitants of Gdansk. Mr. Lavolta is here, he is the Deputy Mayor of Turin in Italy. I'll give you the floor right away. Thank you for having come. We didn't see each other last year, so welcome to Nice. Before I give the floor to Jean, I would like to ask you to talk not only about Fiat and the Juventus that we all know, that those are topics you can talk about next time perhaps. Tell us what you're doing in the area of smart cities in Turin. I apologize for my French, says the speaker. I would like to thank Nice for this invitation. I convey greetings of the Mayor of Turin, Piero Fassini, who is also Mayor of the greater metropolitan area of Torino. I'd like to take up a few minutes of your time. Of course, there are several very specific examples that I might mention. What we've tried to do is to change the city over the last few years. Our idea is to become a smart city in the area of energy, transport, urban mobility in general. I want to describe the efforts that we have made together with citizens. I'll talk about a method that's typical in our city. Whenever we need to think about the future of this city and its prospects, we try to work with all the citizens. We have a foundation in Torino called Torino Smart City. I'm the president of this foundation. It works a lot with the private enterprise. We believe strongly, indeed, in sharing efforts to develop the city. We believe in PPP. Our city comprises 200,000 inhabitants. Over the last few years, Fiat has acquired a different dimension, and Torino is no longer just an industrial city. The city comprises many different lines of activity, including culture, and also we're deeply committed to sustainability. Over the last few years, we've hosted many major events, like in 2006 with the Olympics. And there's been not only a physical development of the city, but we've invested a lot in society and the knowledge-based economy. There have been a number of milestones, some key moments in time when we sat back to think about the future. We have defined certain strategic projects for the future, and together with the city and NGOs and companies, we have implemented a number of projects. The first dates from 1995, when we defined the first town master plan. Then we had the Winter Olympics in 2006, and we defined that year the second strategic plan. In 2015, we shall be defining a third strategic plan. This plan comprises a European dimension, of course. The future of the city is obviously linked to the development of smart cities within the European Union. There are four main pillars: mobility, inclusion, life and health, and energy. And we've used these four areas to build up the future policy of the city. We have a project called SMILE. That means smart mobility, inclusion, life, and energy. This is what I was saying earlier on. We drove this up with the population. Over 5 months, we discussed a number of issues. 350 people were involved, representing companies, various entities, research centers, which have developed over the past few years in the city, and associations of young people and very creative entities. We all work together to answer a very simple question. What do we need to do to become a smart city? What do we need to do to achieve this? I have my own answer. I deal with public works, innovation, and many other topics in the city, but I can't single-handed answer such a key question, because we're talking about how we want to shape the city in the future. So we worked together with all these people. We worked over several months with citizens and key players in the city. And what about the results? 45 specific activities in the four areas I mentioned earlier on. We talked about the need also to have cross-cutting action. Our administration is overly vertical. to develop the smart dimension of the city. So this is very important because within the administration we have created a sort of a cross-cutting team, and probably in France as well, you have this vertical structure because of Napoleon. And this is just a fact of life in our general city managements. But it's not very consistent with an administration that can interact and overcome this compartmentalization. So we drew up 45 actions. How will these activities be carried out? Resources may not be sufficient. We have 3 means of financing all this, and we'll be working on all these 3 scores. First of all, we can reorganize our priorities within this kind of a common strategy, and that's something we'll be doing in Torino. Also, the idea is to answer calls for proposals within the EU. There are many under the program Horizon 2020. And then there's a third area which I think is particularly important, namely cooperation between the public and private sectors. We've won a number of calls for tender in Europe. In the area, for example, of public domain innovation. We're highly mobilized, and thus we have defined a district in the city which has become a living lab. Companies can test certain objects. All this is done, of course, together with the administration to improve the quality of life of our citizens. Of course, there are many rules when it comes to interacting with the private sector. This living lab is very important because you can test out within the city the reaction of the public to these PP initiatives. Also, we've organized a contest called Torino Social Innovation. We have a large number of university students in the city. There are about 900,000 inhabitants and 100,000 university students. In Torino, we have the university and the Politecnico, which is a very important one. It invests a lot in research. And with the Polytechnic, we will be putting up a building which will welcome an energy center which will gather all the energy data for the Piedmont region and then for Italy at large. So what I'm saying is that we have a multi-stakeholder system, and the system fosters social innovation in Torino. We brought together all those who deal with innovation, and together we defined certain opportunities for building social innovation projects. It's very simple. We defined together the issues facing the city, we analyzed the needs of the city, and we tried to answer these questions together. We defined and modified the administrative structure of the city, the way we implement our policy. Here you have the results of this experiment. 170 projects were submitted and discussed. We'll be financing 22 projects, and 25 projects are in the incubation phase. Then there's one last thing I wanted to discuss with you. This is an experiment within the municipal administration. We have 10,500 employees in the Torino City Council. But our view is that these 10,500 people are potential innovators. After all, you are the main protagonists in all these experiments with citizens. So our feeling is that we should all become potential innovators. We published a call for proposals, and many employees sent in proposals. This has enabled us to redefine the organization of the City Council. I haven't talked about specific examples of technological innovation because you're all familiar with these kinds of things. What I wanted to say is that it's important for the public administration to provide support, and it also needs to reorganize itself in order to organize ambitious objectives for the future. And we hope this future will improve the general standard of living and quality of life in our cities. Thank you. Please remain a bit longer with us. I'd like you to listen to what Jean Rottner has to say. Jean, thank you very much. Thank you for being with us once again. You're very loyal to innovative cities. We said you'd stay until 11:45. So thank you for being here again this year. You're going to talk to us about Mulhouse. You're also president of the National Fédération of City Planning Agencies. You're very much involved in the Association of Mayors in France. You are a person with deep-seated beliefs, particularly in the idea of creative cities. So thank you for sharing your vision with us. And you might react to the two preceding statements, too.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having invited me once again to this wonderful city of Nice for this brilliant meeting. But, ladies and gentlemen, I must make a confession and a statement, a declaration, in fact, a declaration of love. I love the city. And when a mayor loves a city, his duty is to make a commitment and to try to ensure that cities and what cities are all about can be better understood. Today in France, there is a very lively debate about what we mean by cities, peri-urban areas or rural areas. But it seems to me that this debate is now out of date. And I believe that in Poland, as in Italy, you have understood the necessary relationship that exists between all these types of territory so that they shall become more efficient. The presentations made by my colleagues from elsewhere in Europe were brilliant, were exceptional. And they, I think, bear witness to the dynamic nature of our cities throughout the world. Just a few days ago, I was in Montreal, invited by the Mayor of Montreal, who'd brought together some 30 mayors from cities from all over the world. Hiroshima, Miami, Bamako, Casablanca, Montreal, of course, and Paris, too. The subject of the meeting was to get together as mayors to think about the problems of living together. Living together is, of course, at the basis of everything, of all our projects. It's at the basis of our cities, which are now becoming more agile, more simple. It's the foundation of our cities, which are devoting thought to the way they are used, to the links between residents, the private sector, the public sector, the population. All this is essential. And if I can talk for a moment as president of the National Federation of City Agencies, some 30 of these exist throughout France. They look at the lives of some 35 million people in France, and they try to offer new ideas, perhaps innovative ideas to our politicians, and maybe they try to detect what tomorrow's cities, tomorrow's territories must be based on. For example, last year we thought about the subject of our common assets, our shared assets in cities. And of course, another subject is the individual. How can we move from the individual to the collectivity, to the social fabric? And how in our cities can we try to ensure that there is more social cohesion between residents? And our subject here this morning is Draw Me a Creative City. Now, I found this was a wonderful title for a meeting. When you ask a mayor to design or to draw a collective, creative city, whether you be a mayor or one of the deputy mayors, this depends on teamwork. And you've in fact said that this doesn't just depend on the people who are elected, it depends on the politicians, but of course it depends too on their staff and on the whole of the population. And I think we need to go still further than this. For me, as a mayor, the creative city means imagining and building the future, going beyond the simple digital city. The digital city is, in my view, something that already exists. We need to go beyond this. We need to think about how we can live in our cities in this digital future. The smart city is already something that is behind us. Look at Gdansk, look at Turin, look at Mulhouse. All our cities today have become intelligent, have become smart cities. But how can we move on from the smart city to the city of intelligence? This is the question we need to ask. And in the creative city, I think we can see something new emerging, which we are discovering little by little. That is this notion of the link that exists today between the public sector, the private sector, the population, and perhaps a new player on the scene, a player who is positioned partly in the public sector, partly in the private sector, partly in the economic sector. I'm talking about culture. I'll come back to this in just a moment, but let me first of all take the example of Montreal. I don't know if you visited this city of Montreal, but there is a particularly interesting organization there which is called Culture Montreal. Culture Montreal, Montreal Culture, is an organization where everybody involved in culture gets together to talk about and think about their responsibilities so that Montreal can become the place to be in the field of culture. And a city which in the north of America can become essential, can become a reference point. So they've launched new approaches, social approaches, democratic approaches, digital approaches. And little by little, Montreal has developed this new project which has come from the citizens, people who have decided to create something new in their city, something new, something dynamic, something which can make Montreal a genuine creative city. A city which brings together not only an economic approach, not only a digital approach, but above all, a completely coherent cultural approach, where the people working in the field of culture can draw inspiration from the economic sector, and the economic sector can look to culture for what it sometimes lacks. That is, this spark of folly, this creative element which will take it still further forward. All this, I think, is very inspirational. When you have responsibilities, as I do, the possibility of traveling, of meeting other people, other mayors, is something from which you can draw inspiration. And in a city like mine, which is not as big as yours, gentlemen, we have nevertheless our own history, a very interesting history. Back at the beginning of the 19th century, 1806, some 20 businessmen from Mulhouse, all Protestants, went across the Channel to Liverpool and Manchester in England, and they brought back some new ideas. They brought back new innovative techniques for printing on fabric. And the economic history of a little town of just 6,000 inhabitants, grew to 100,000 in 1870. And it was because of this new development, this new invention, and alongside this economic expansion, there was also a cultural expansion. Naturally, we've been affected by various crises, but today, as Paul Éluard says, there is no such thing as coincidence, there are only rendezvous. So our creative city, our innovative city enables us to ask the right questions. In the areas which were formerly industrial areas, I have something like 300,000 square meters, which can be exploited for something new, for design, for culture, for new forms of the economy. All this makes it possible for my territory, which was suffering from the industrial decline of our area, to set out on a new departure. So we need a new international dynamics of exchange, thanks to culture, thanks to what is sometimes called the mauve economy. It follows on from the green economy and from the social economy. We've all been through these phases. But today, yes, my city is moving forward because it is becoming once again creative. And it attracts creative people. Creative people move in to reconquer the city. We've talked about Napoleon recently, but thanks to these new scouts, as it were, we are conquering new spaces in the town. And maybe, as mayors, we can wonder whether they are not taking over from us, taking over from the politicians. And I think this is wonderful. I think this is quite exceptional. They enable us to redefine our jobs. We can allow them to do what they do best. We can be the connectors, we can be the facilitators, and we can allow these creative people to move ahead. They can do the job more quickly than we can. Thank you very much. Thank you for those very thought-provoking ideas, particularly about the idea of creating the city of intelligence. The mayor of Gdansk now has to leave us, but he's going to be replaced by some other speakers. Thank you very much, Mr. Adamowicz, for your presence here. Thank you very much for coming to join us here. I know you have a plane to catch. So I'm going to call now on Eric Mazoyer. Eric Mazoyer is going to come up to the podium straight away, and also Albert Asseraf from Decaux. We've heard from the politicians. We're now going to hear from two people who work in industry. But their presentations, I think, are very complementary. They're going to be talking about the art of building new neighborhoods and about the art of living in these new neighborhoods, in these new cities. So thank you, Eric. And then we'll try to launch fruitful exchange about this topic of Draw Me a Creative City. I'd like to have been able to greet the mayor of Gdansk because Bouygues Immobilier has some 90 people working in Poland, and I had a dream, which was to move into Gdansk, but unfortunately I wasn't able to talk about the mayor. That would have been an ideal opportunity. However, I want to make a new contribution, our own perhaps more modest contribution. We are simply developers, builders. We develop new spaces in the cities. Do I have a remote control for the slides? Hidden under the paper. Okay, thank you. Next slide. So we are creators of spaces in cities. Our job is to create spaces in which people live, consume, exchange, work. We do this on the scale of a building, and we also do it now on the scale of a neighborhood. Our job, therefore, is to imagine the new neighborhoods of tomorrow, the smart neighborhoods, which will make use of the wonderful work that has already been done by our cities in terms of digital technology and smart cities. When I listened to the president of the local metropolis earlier, I was very interested when he said that all this could only work if we looked at things from the point of view of the consumer. We are integrators, we are not specialists in high technology, so our job is to supply services, provided, of course, that the economic model functions and that the general framework exists. So in order to do this, we have to obey a certain number of rules we try to follow when we design new neighborhoods. This is a new neighborhood in Bordeaux, 2,500 dwellings, office spaces, and also commercial spaces. And we want to make this a genuine intergenerational development. For us, this is important. All the generations must be there. All the generations must have spaces available for them. Students, of course, there can be students who are 70 years old these days. We must have a mix of functions, all the functions which make our towns beautiful, dynamic, and lively 24 hours a day must be present there. So dwellings, offices, business activities, shops. And of course, we must find the right balance in social terms. That, of course, is something that we must do hand in hand with the politicians. Now, how do we actually do this? How do we work? Well, for the last 10 years, we've been working, as it were, with 3 layers in our minds. The first layer is mixed urban development. That's what we've just been talking about. The second layer is the digital neighborhood, and the next layer is the energy-based neighborhood. And now we can blend together the energy networks and the digital networks. We can have a neighborhood which can simply plug into the smart city. Urban development, that is, of course, our responsibility. The idea is to create well-being, to create quality of life. And that depends on the quality of the urban planning and the architecture. You can be very intelligent, you can integrate a whole lot of technology into our buildings, but essentially buildings are designed as spaces where people can live. So our city planning and the quality of our architecture are essential. All this so that we can live better together. That is our responsibility, hand in hand, of course, with the local politicians. The digital neighborhood, I'll show you an example of this in just a moment, because we're going to launch the first in France and perhaps the first in Europe. It means, first of all, a neighborhood with a connected community. It also means that this community can connect with the outside world through all the digital services which need to be developed, which are developed perhaps already by the city. And then it is a plug-and-play system. That's extremely important because in our profession we take some time to catch up with all these developments. When you build in concrete, it takes time. But we need to be able to take on board technologies which are moving much faster than we generally do. It's important to be able to upgrade our cities. Just one comment here. Designing a building takes about 5 years. Designing and building a neighborhood, as we can see in Lyon with the confluence area, takes 10 to 15 years. But if you look at the way your portable phone has developed over the last 10 years, you realize that there are 2 different timescales involved here. Now, of course, all this involves the emergence of new services with interoperability and mobility. These are services which are available close at hand, health services, for example. It means mobilizing resources, and it means bringing together all the players in a neighborhood in one network. Now, for this, we make use of 6 fundamental pillars for the development of our neighborhoods. Obviously, we've talked about energy and the networks, economic networks. There are also the urban services, green mobility. We also make commitments in terms of water supply and waste management. We make commitments about low energy consumption in our buildings with advice on the use of energy. And all this needs to be done in the framework of participation. One of the previous speakers said this. In the internet era, the Maire of Nanterre has asked us to develop the town centre of Nanterre with a population of 100,000. And all this needs to be done on the basis of participation with the population and with the politicians and a certain number of associations. Just one word here. There is a city app, which is a new innovation this year. Tomorrow afternoon, here we shall have the Deputy Mayor of Nanterre who will be talking about this particular project. So, in the photograph here, you can see these 3 buildings which communicate with one another. This is part of the Lyon confluence area. These are mixed-use buildings with offices, dwellings, and shopping centres. But we've shared the car park spaces, we've shared the energy supply. And of course, if you have positive energy buildings, then you can create a whole island, a whole neighborhood which is generating energy, and you can exchange energy between the various different functions involved. We're now thinking about moving on from positive energy to a positive economy. What do we mean by positive economy in a neighborhood? Well, we mean opening up the resources to the outside world. If you look at the occupancy rate of the car parks, for example, it's very low. The occupancy rate of a meeting room is also very low. So we can imagine that companies will be able, in the future, thanks to a certain number of digital options and services, they will be able to create income by sharing some of their underused resources with other parts of the town. We're setting up associations managed by the residents of the neighborhood. We're going to try to create a procurement platform on the level of the area. In other words, grouped purchases will be possible, grouped procurement will be possible, and all this requires local participation with digital concierge services, digital car sharing services, and so on. So Nanterre, I just mentioned this example. This is going to be the first demonstrator of this scale. The idea will be living better for less money. We participated in this with the city right from the start. We've been working hand in hand with local associations and with the municipal authority. We have a dedicated R&D platform, as we did with EasyGrid. For each of our operations, we've tried to set up a research and development platform which brings together a large number of groups like Microsoft, but we've also participated with a certain number of smaller companies, startup, and we even have an investment fund called Bird, the aim of which is to aid a certain number of startups which are working on problems of urban development. And we're also looking for sustainable development and management, making use of a public-private partnership. We believe that we can set up new structures for managing neighborhoods in the future. And because we have some politicians, some lawmakers here, I'd like to launch an appeal to them. All the technology now exists, that's no longer a problem, but we do have some obstacles. They are, however, legislative obstacles. For energy exchange, for example, you need to be able to sell energy to your neighbor. So what we are asking is the creation of the status of an energy creator in France. We're not interested in making too much money. We simply want to be able to sell our excess energy. We'd also like to come back and rethink some of our legislation on the creation of social housing. We need new means of managing our neighborhoods in the future. So it's the lawmaker who needs to help us here, who needs to push through reforms in some of our laws so that these neighborhoods can discover new ways of managing well-being for everybody. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much. Thank you, Eric Mazoyer. And now it's Mr. Albert Asseraf who will be taking the floor, who comes from JC Decaux. He's going to take us on a journey through time. He's a general manager for strategy, marketing and studies for the JC Decaux group, which is a great success story, of course. It's a family company. But you worked on some new and simple concepts a few years ago, which have taken off in a very interesting way. You try to help people to move, to travel, and you have adapted to new technologies. And I think you have a little film to show us too. Quite so, yes. I wanted to begin this presentation by showing you a film which is a leap through time. You may be disappointed because it's a leap through time, not into the future, but into the past. We're going to begin in 1945 to see that a certain number of people at that time had a rather original vision of the city of the future. You may have seen this film in the past. It was a short film back in the 1940s. And we've also added some contemporary images to show you that sometimes people can have a vision because what they imagined 70 years ago in some ways is precisely what is happening today. That's the introductory page that I mentioned before we move on to the film. And then after the film, I'll say a word or two about our vision and our contribution to the smart city. I'm not sure whether it starts automatically or whether I need to trigger it. I have to do it, so I press the button again and off it goes. There are some little pocket radios now available. You don't need to buy a newspaper anymore. You can listen to the news all day long, or you can listen to a political program or a presentation of fashion or a sports commentary, or even you can do your crossword puzzle. And in the future, the street will look very strange. Naturally, in the underground, you'll be able to look at somebody else's TV set over their shoulder, and there will be some things that are so fascinating that collisions will happen. All the cars will have their own screen. Let's hope that there won't be bad news which will put drivers off their stride. Of course, there were some people who will be not very well educated, who will steal images. But of course, images nowadays will be visible everywhere. You'll be able to see a boxing match in your soup tureen. And when you go to bed, maybe you'll be able to see a Bohemian dancer on your bed cover. No, Citroën, you can't stroke the pictures. And you'll even be able to think of the past when TV was not even in 3D. I think that was, for the time, this was based on a short story by René Barjavel, who was a science fiction writer, but it shows that just after the war, some people had already imagined and foreseen what was going to happen in the city of tomorrow. And our cities today have to face up to a new form of competition to attract a certain number of activities, whether it be tourism, economic activities, the digital economy, startups, but also, of course, industry. And we know that all our cities today are trying to create something new, something different. And what we can see is that this concept of the smart city is at the heart of the thinking of a lot of cities, a lot of territories, a lot of conurbations. Just read the press. There are many, many examples of this. Not a day, not a week goes by without a new article about the city of tomorrow. President Estrosi reminded us of this. To be in the top 4 or the top 5 of smart cities in the world is, of course, an acknowledgement of how active Nice has been in this field. So, if we tried to sum up the concepts on which the smart city is based, I did this yesterday. I tapped in smart cities on the internet, and you get more than 230 million hits on Google if you type in smart city as a keyword. So you can see that this is a very important subject today. And if there's something systematic that emerges from all these searches, things that appear very frequently in the thinking devoted to smart cities, we find that there is the new economy based on the city. There's the question of mobility in all the major transport companies. They don't call themselves transport companies anymore. They talk about mobility. There are issues around governance as well because of the participation of individuals. The Maire of Gdansk talked about how citizens could now participate in decision-making. Of course, another important subject is the quality of life. The Maire of Mulhouse reminded us of this. Quality of life means transforming cities to the benefit of the residents. And then, of course, there's the environment. The environment is a major issue when we talk about smart cities. We should see the smart city as a possibility for growth for many companies, and it's also a lever for the politicians. Many institutes have looked at this market in terms of new creation of wealth. Billions of dollars or euros are involved in the years to come, and henceforth companies, just like cities, are very much concerned by this topic. 60% of companies questioned now have an organization turned towards the smart city. And you can see that all this is extremely important then in strategic terms for businesses. Now, what's going to change in the city? The city is going to be highly digitalized. Technologies are going to represent a new way of providing services. services in terms of car parking, data, energy saving. In fact, something new for many things which will be beneficial in the future. An example, I was in Paris a few days ago and I saw somebody who was cleaning a wall, cleaning a tag off a wall. But what did he do? Well, this was something quite new. He stopped, he took a photograph with his smartphone, and then he cleaned off the tag, and then he took a new photograph, another photograph of the clean wall. So I said, why do you take this before and after photo? And he said, well, now in our organization, we have to date our our interventions. We have to show exactly what we did, how long it took, and then we send all these data to the town hall, which then processes the information, no doubt in order to optimize a certain number of services devoted to these cleaning operations. So all this is now part of our everyday life. Mr. Mazoyer has just talked about smart buildings. Smart buildings already exist. It's now possible to manage remotely energy consumption, lighting, and Mr. Mazoyer can explain this much better than I can. There are also a certain number of indicators that can be monitored remotely from absolutely anywhere in the world. You can manage your connected building, you can monitor it. This is revolutionary in terms of modifying our working conditions in the future. People themselves are going to become smarter. I don't know if some of you took part in Futur en Scène a few days ago. Personally, I saw this for the first time. It means that a certain number of people agreed to have a chip implanted under their skin. You can see the photograph on the screen, and that means that you then become an enriched individual, because under your skin you have a chip which will provide a certain amount of information about you. Or with the right type of connectivity, all these data can be connected and collected, and in terms of public health, this is a very virtuous circle that can be created. Obviously, you have to accept the idea of wearing a chip. Theoretically, it has an unlimited lifetime. And this is interesting from other points of view too. I talked to two surgeons who operated recently on somebody in Barcelona, and they said to me that rather than trying to improve an individual who has already suffered, we're going to augment an individual. In other words, we're going to add something to the individual. We're going to improve the performance of the individual. We're going to enable the individual to do things which he or she couldn't do before. So the smart city is now taking on a new dimension. Mr. Rottner talked about culture. Here's a photograph, but you can see this as a film. It's a digital work of art. In fact, it's simply the representation of planes crisscrossing the skies of the planet. And you can see the airports with the landing and the takeoffs, and then the corridors. And if you put this on your wall in real time, you have a digital work of art, a digital video, which looks very, very original.
So how is JC Decaux involved in smart cities? Of course, we can try to improve the infrastructure. I'm sure you all have 4G, if not 5G subscriptions. Of course, Wi-Fi should be unlimited. We'll probably have a limited number of antennae. However, on our rooftops, we won't be able to add more antennae unless we go off into space. So we've developed an activity called micro antennae, small antennae. We have an agreement with Alcatel, Huawei, and Vodafone for having very low emission, tiny antennae in cities. Over 80 or 100 meters, you have broadband access. You can see these little black boxes just next to the symbol 4G. We installed these 200 small cells, which are 4G, with Vodafone Netherlands. In terms of emission, it's tiny. If you measure before and afterwards, there's absolutely no difference in what you observe, at least in terms of what independent entities observe. And thanks to this, of course, you have broadband access around this urban furniture. And we just signed a pilot agreement with Berlin, too. The idea is to provide Wi-Fi in town, like in Dusseldorf, Freiburg. We're holding discussions with other cities in exchange for putting ads, which are very visible in the future, in the city. Of course, we comply with all the regulatory constraints, and we develop Wi-Fi access in the cities. At the Paris airports, Wi-Fi is free. Why? Because it's financed by our ad on the welcome page. And we propose this to the Paris airports, and in exchange, they get free Wi-Fi. This is also a picture of a smart city. Here you have Vélib. That was the first manifestation of the shared economy, and how millions of bits of data could be processed in real time with a view to regulating and managing the 20,000 bicycles in Paris. 150,000 bicycles were rented out yesterday in Paris. That's what we usually measure when the weather is fine. 250,000 or millions since this was launched. That's another way of creating a smart city. You offer a bicycle in the right place at the right time to help with individual mobility. And then intelligent urban furniture, that's also being added to cities. We got the contract for bus shelters in Paris, and you'll have touch screens with information on transport, leisure activities, and culture. All this is being done in partnership with startups. This is a film you can find on our site. It shows how we have designed these new bus shelters in Paris. You can see the screen, which I've just talked about. It's a connected screen, of course. And I would like to wind up by showing you these new tables, which we're installing in public gardens. These are tables for playing games, which we have installed together with startups. The startups work on the content, we on the actual table. And this is how we're working on the smart city of the future. You can see how individuals can participate more in the city. You have these touch screens, which we've installed. And you can see the Twitter site of the São Paulo town hall. And this, you can thus get information as to the time, the temperature, and a number of other data. So we're all collectively in charge of writing the history of smart cities. Thank you very much. Please come up to the rostrum as well, together with the other people here. I think you get along well with Eric Mazoyer. I'm going to get you to do a little exercise here. As Jean Rottner said, draw me a creative city. That's a very good title, but we can perhaps improve on it next year as well. We'll have to draw on our collective intelligence, of course. I was looking for a definition of creativity. There are a number of points here. You have to be creative in terms of the regulatory framework. We can talk about positive economies, working together, the post-digital era, an augmented individual ecosystems. A master plan was talked about by Mr. Lavolta. That is strategic planning. So I don't know whether there are any questions in the room, but perhaps you could each tell me in turn how you would define creativity in light of what we've seen. And Pawel Adamowicz has had to leave. His city is very interesting because it's a port city. I'd like to add one thing. I think it has to be disruptive. Creation, by definition, has to be disruptive. It has to be a major change, and we've looked at all these huge technological breakthroughs. And this disruption should also give rise to creation in turn. That's what I view as being creative. I think that a creative city is a city which offers opportunities. Let's take the case of mobility in a smart city. Citizens also have various choices when it comes to the most intelligent mode of transport. There isn't just one possibility. You could choose a bicycle, you could choose car sharing, a bus, a tram. The new role of cities is to offer several different possibilities. The citizen becomes proactive. The protagonist is the citizen who then decides in an intelligent manner. A creative city is a city that can provide all these opportunities to develop creativity. I'm thinking about the young generation and also all the other inhabitants of the city. So the city offers various opportunities and possibilities. I have a feeling that we're reinventing cities, where every entity is reinventing the part it plays. As a property developer, things are really taking off and changing. If we don't call what we do into question, we won't make sufficient progress. Look at the relationship between the inhabitants and the representatives who are elected to the city council, for example. We have portability, digital technologies are an answer to compartmentalization. People have a different relationship now with their daily existence. Creativity, for me, means calling things into question. If you can't call yourself into question, I think our brains can invent all sorts of new solutions, but we have to call ourselves into question. So we're reinventing ourselves as a society and as administrations. Public and private sectors have to work more closely together. It's not just a question of protecting the environment. Consumers, if there are more and more ecologically friendly things, will move naturally towards a better environment. And I think we have to factor in all these aspects. I'll be very quick. These gentlemen have just given an able summary of the situation. When I was coming to Nice, I hit on a new concept, the concept of 3 Ps, to explain what we are all doing together. Public, private, that we know extremely well, and then we have the concept people, PPP, which means that the people must also be involved in this trilogy, which is shaping the city of the future to convey expectations and needs. Everyone has to work together, including public and private companies and the people. And I think in this respect, we can all agree on this underlying principle. As Jean Rottner said, in fact, we're not only talking about new districts and cities. In our old European cities, many districts or areas have been rehabilitated and completely changed. We'll be talking about this at special sessions tomorrow and even this afternoon. I believe this is an important point. You have these new areas, but also the old ones. When you work in this area, you have to talk about inclusion, the mix amongst different people, and the cultural dimension, which encompasses past history. I referred to history in my statement. Smart cities communicate with each other around the world, share ideas. So the idea is to invent new things all the time. Inventing a new city is always very complicated. We've talked about moving beyond certain standards and indulging in innovation and experimentation. When it comes to rehabilitation, however, Sometimes, I'm sorry to say this, it's easier to raise an area and build again than to rehabilitate. But when you're proud of this heritage, be it Peugeot, Russ in Mulhouse, or Fiat in Torino, or Gdansk with the port area, we have a past history, a culture, a population, and we need to draw on all these dimensions to move forward. Also, you have to be prepared to admit failure. This is something politicians don't like. If you talk about failure, that is a project which may not succeed, it's difficult to get the message across in a given administration. Yet sometimes you have to. Running risks as well. For example, in Mulhouse, there were 10,000 square meters, which was a free industrial wasteland, and we studied post-industrial rehabilitation for the area. For 3 years, I failed to respect all the basic rules when it comes to public projects, but I wanted to create an iconic building and think together with the users and the general population. There are 4 Ps, in fact: partnership, public-private, population partnership. So we try to work together with associations and lobbies representing people who have handicaps, for example. The idea was to develop this wasteland in a different way. You have to ask yourself some key questions. The project involved 150 square meters. I had to invent something new, run certain risks. But with such a vast project, you need to also look at European programs, university research programs, interreg programs. We need public-private partnership to achieve this kind of a thing. We need PPPs in order to redevelop our heritage. Sometimes today, for the private sector, it's easier to build something brand new. It's far easier than to become involved in a different kind of a project which is more complicated, where the return on investment may not be definite. But we do indeed need investors, not just property developers, but investment funds, people who are willing to run risks, who don't expect to have a return on investment within 4 years, who can afford to lose money the first time round and earn money maybe third time round. That is what we city entities need. You're quite right. The first positive energy building, as we're certified ISO 9000, we had to say to people, don't respect any of our procedures if you want to put up a positive energy building. And they were really successful. Now we have whole eco-districts with the mayor of other cities. We're testing first such development in a very difficult district from a social stance. We're transferring the idea of property and ownership for the owners, for the tenants, etc. And this may be a new avenue. Perhaps people could live in areas in a different way, and we wouldn't have the owner-occupiers necessarily. We could change this very standard scheme. The idea is to go much further and to test new possibilities out in terms of urban renovation and housing estates. In any event, I think that the worst thing one can do is to do nothing in all these areas. As stated, you learn by doing. It's not always easy. You have to run risks, as stated. The thing is, you need to do things together. We've talked about private. We have, in France, been talking about public-private partnerships for about 10 years. Why does this not work better? I don't know how to answer the question, obviously. Maybe it's cultural, maybe it's financial. Maybe it hinges on the regulatory framework. I think it's regulatory. Let me give you an example. Say the mayor of Mulhouse wants to call on urban air and develop an existing district. If I provide ideas, if I provide know-how and I provide advice, then I can't be the prime contractor, for example. It's crazy in France not to be able to pool intelligence in the private sector and in the public sector, and research in both sectors as well. I hope that the Sustainable City Institute, which will be launching 3 demonstrators in France, I hope that this entity, the IVD, and the Prime Minister will agree that these 3 demonstrators should be in special tax-free areas. The idea is to be able to rise above the current regulatory framework in order to move forward. So once again, we really have to rid ourselves of this administrative straitjacket and all these rules and laws. What about Italy? Well, in Italy, it's also very difficult. The problem is the same. It's all these rules and regulations we have. In the meantime, while we wait for laws to be changed, we need to be very careful. I work in the City Hall every day, and I'm very aware of the risks involved. Private entities often say they have the smartest, most intelligent solution that they can just pull out of a top hat. But it's necessary to plan things properly. It's necessary to conduct an in-depth analysis of the requirements of the area. The risk is that you build something combining all the most intelligent solutions, but the most intelligent solution may be different depending on whether you work in the City Hall or whether you're a member of the population. So I think you need to talk a lot with the people. You need properly to analyze real needs. You have to plan properly. You have to combine the collective intelligence in order to be able to find optimal solutions to needs. In France, we have a huge number of rules and regulations, or perhaps the country where we have the most complex rules. Yet there is some good news in this area. The Ministry for the Economy is currently tackling the matter. He set up a working group, the idea being to foster innovation when it comes to public tendering and PPP. Innovating, of course, carries a cost. And sometimes it's not worthwhile to be innovative because your project may be more expensive. But it's necessary to foster innovation. It's necessary to encourage startups and innovative companies. There's a working group dealing with this matter, and we hope that as a result, the rules and regulations will evolve. We've just about reached the end of our session. There's another thing we haven't talked about much in the case of innovation. It's the intangible aspect, the idea, for example. Ideas are very valuable. Ideas can even be sold. Say you have an idea in the U.S. Even if you're not the prime contractor, say it's you who had the idea and you get paid for that. Now cities are starting to have all sorts of ideas. For us, I wondered, as an elected member, I wondered whether we couldn't have a return on investment for our ideas, because on the other side of the Atlantic, this is what happens. And no doubt this trend will spread to Europe. This will lead to many changes in the public-private partnership. The public side will also be able to achieve a return on investment thanks to its ideas. What strikes me today is how curious industry is, how keen industry is to build the city of the future together with us, to understand better how cities work. And cities often have a head start when it comes, for example, to data. The idea is to share our experiences so that the private sector can move forward faster, and that will facilitate our existence. We don't just need services, we need to build a sort of a command center. We need to work carefully on our plans. What is horizontal works well, but what is vertical can act as a trigger or a driving force. Thank you. That will be our conclusion. That brings us to the end of the morning. That's what Innovative City is all about. It's this mixture between the public and private sectors, people who provide ideas, technologies, and new solutions. Thank you very much. I wish you a very good remainder of the day and enjoy your afternoon.
Et bon appétit.
And enjoy your lunch.